Greetings, I'm Joey Bro, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're diving into a long-awaited build tutorial. Let's have a look. For this tutorial, I'll be using an updated version of my Ark build. It's mostly the same, but I've adjusted the horizontal cross-section to be less rounded at the bottom, giving a slightly more squared shape. This design, commonly seen in large cargo vessels, improves stability when carrying heavy loads. I've also made some aesthetic changes to the sail and stabilizer and added a keel and runners underneath. Given the large scale of this build and the time it would take to go over every block placement, I'll instead be walking through my overall approach to building the Ark. I'll also include plenty of detailed visuals on screen to help you recreate it exactly if you choose to do so. Alright, let's get started on building the Ark. First, I determine the size of the build. The Bible gives the Ark's dimensions as 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Using the Royal Egyptian cubit, approximately 20.6 inches or 52.4 centimeters, and assuming a single Minecraft block is roughly 1 yard or 1 meter, this converts to about 171 blocks long, 29 blocks wide, and 18 blocks high. I round to the nearest odd number for length and width and the nearest even number for height, as I generally find this makes building easier. I will also be using spruce as the primary material for my Ark, as its darker color helps represent the Ark being covered inside and out with pitch, as described in the Bible. I make sure to place my size guides at least 1 block above the ground to leave room for the keel and runners underneath. I start by building a frame that represents a horizontal cross-section of the ship, which will serve as the ribbing of the Ark. Since I plan for the hull to be 2 blocks thick, I make sure to leave a 2-block space between the frame and the guides at the bottom and sides. The frame cross-section should include the floors for the 3 decks mentioned in the Bible, the lower, second, and third decks. Next, I duplicate this frame 8 blocks ahead, leaving a 7-block gap between them. I ensure that both frames together are centered along the ship's midpoint as indicated by the guides. I connect the 2 frames with horizontal beams using a combination of logs and stairs for the framing. This ties the frames together into a section that can be repeated along the length of the ship. Repeat this section 7 more times both in front and behind the current section, creating a total of 15 sections along the length of the ship. Add an 8th section both in front and behind the current sections. These sections will have different framing, as they will serve as wells for the ramps connecting the decks. Each of the sections will be split in half, leaving a gap for both an upward and downward ramp. This brings the total to 17 sections along the length of the ship. Next, we'll add a pair of frame sections extending from both the front and back of the ship. These sections will help shape the more rounded contours of the hull at both ends. The top horizontal beams on the end frame for the bow are placed 1 block lower to accommodate the fixed wooden sail that will be added later. Now we'll add curved framing to connect the sides of the ship to the newly extended sections. This step can be a bit tricky, so take your time to adjust the shape until you are satisfied with the result. Next, we'll add the keel underneath the ship, connecting it to the frame. The keel will run along the length of the ship, blending into the rigid sail at the front and the stabilizer at the rear. The keel is 3 blocks wide, with logs running along its length. Use wood blocks instead of log blocks when constructing curved sections of the keel or other features to maintain a smoother appearance. Keep in mind that neither the sail nor the stabilizer are mentioned in the Bible, so these are entirely optional features. Another optional feature not mentioned in the Bible is the moon pools at the front and rear of the ship. These are well-like structures that open to the sea at the bottom of the hull. They could provide additional stability and allow the up and down motion of the water inside to help circulate air throughout the Ark. These can be integrated into the framing just beyond the sections designated for the ramps. There are a total of 4 moon pools, with 2 on each end of the ship positioned on either side of the keel. The moon pools are 5x5 in size, with a 3x3 open space in the middle, and extend through all 3 decks from the bottom of the ship to the top. At the top, they have an opening facing outward toward the sides of the ship. This opening is accessible via a fence gate, allowing waste to be disposed of overboard through the moon pool if needed. Next, we'll fill in the gaps between the framing to add the flooring for our 3 decks. For the lower deck, we'll use planks, while for the second and third decks, we'll use a combination of upside-down slabs and stairs to create the illusion of floorboards being supported underneath by horizontal beams. We'll also need to add fence railings around any gaps in the deck floors. This includes the light wells running down the center of the ship and the gaps for the ramps. On the lower and second decks, the fences around the ramp wells should extend from floor to ceiling, creating a sort of safety cage around the ramps. Now we'll add the ramps inside the ramp wells at both ends of the ship, connecting all 3 decks. Each ramp well will contain 4 ramps, with 2 parallel but mirrored ramps connecting each pair of decks, one set leading from the lower deck to the second deck, and another set from the second deck to the third deck. Each ramp is made of 3 slabs, following a gradient of half a block up for every block forward. Each ramp measures 3 blocks wide and 11 blocks long. Next, we'll add the walkway on the third deck, which provides a view through the windows in the Ark's covering at the top of the ship. This walkway can be accessed either by 2 ladders in the center of the ship or by 2 staircases located at either end positioned between the moon pools. Now we can begin adding the outer hull of the Ark to the frame. The hull is 2 blocks thick, with the inner layer made of planks and the outer layer made of logs. Extend this outer layer across all 17 sections along the ship, stopping just before reaching the more complex end frames that form the bow and stern. This next part is a bit more challenging. We'll be adding the 2 hull layers around the frames at both ends of the ship. First, it's best to use wood blocks instead of logs to avoid the visible end grains on the log blocks. You may also need to adjust the 2-layer pattern slightly to make everything fit properly. I'll provide some good angles so you can follow my pattern if needed. When placing the wood blocks for the ends of the hull, you'll need to decide their orientation at the corners. To enhance the surface texture, you can alternate the placement direction with each vertical layer. Next, we'll add extra wood blocks to the stern of the Ark to help smoothly blend the hull's shape into the rear stabilizer. Now we can add runners underneath the Ark on either side of the ship. These run parallel to the keel along the length of the ship. I position mine so they end where they align horizontally with the edges of the moon pool openings on the underside. We can also fill in the center of the wooden sail with stair blocks, alternating their placement to create a more detailed design. Next, we can add the door to the Ark. I've chosen to place mine on the second deck, as the terms lower, second, and third decks in the Bible could suggest that the second deck was the primary deck. Additionally, I positioned the door at the bow end of the ship rather than the center, since placing a large opening near the middle of a ship could create a structural weakness. I'm also adding a window above the door, which represents the one Noah later used to send out the birds for testing. The difference in terms between the windows in the covering and the window the birds were sent from could suggest they were separate features. If you placed your door on the third deck, you could position this window on the opposite side of the deck across from the door. One detail you can now add to the Ark's hull is an alternating pattern of vertical logs that stand out from the horizontal logs of the outer hull. I aligned mine with the frame ribs beneath the hull, then randomly adjusted some forward and back by a block to create a more organic feel. Additionally, I placed horizontal wood blocks at regular intervals along the keel and runners. Remember to use wood blocks instead of logs when necessary to hide the end grain for a cleaner look. At this point, we can finally add the covering to the Ark. Over the windows, the covering slopes half a block down for every block, while over the rest of the Ark, the gradient is half a block down for every 3 blocks. You should be able to use wood slabs for most of the covering, though at the ends of the ship, you'll need to use some full plank blocks to properly fill in the gaps where the covering meets the hull. Finally, we can add some small details by using wooden buttons as pegs, placing them at key points around the Ark's sail, stabilizer, and door to enhance the overall look. We can also add some interior lighting for now to brighten up the inside. With that, we've completed the arc for this tutorial. Interior decoration, including rooms, cages, and storage, will be covered in a future tutorial. For now, I'll leave it up to you to decide how to fill out the inside. There's plenty of space to work with in a ship this size. I hope you found this ARC tutorial helpful. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, feel free to share them in the comments. If you liked it, give a like. Farewell.